I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Excited to dive into more of Lewis's work with you today. What's on the agenda?
Well, today we're jumping back into the year 1920. Lewis is freshly turned 21 years old. And we've got a letter here that he has written to his father that we're going to jump into.
Sounds like a great place to pick up, Jeff. 21 is such a pivotal age. Let's see what Lewis has to say to his father at this stage in his life.
Okay, sounds good. Before we do, I just want to say good morning to the people showing up in the chat. Robot Lady, we've got Sandy. And we've got Daniel saying good morning. Would you like to greet them?
Good morning, Sandy. Good morning, Daniel. Glad to have you both here with us today. Ready for some Lewis?
I think they are. And good morning, Sandy and Daniel. Thanks for joining. All right, we'll jump into this first letter, Robot Lady. It is to his father, as I mentioned. Lewis is writing from an address here, 22 Old Cleve, Washford, Somerset, on the 4th of April, 1920. He says, "My dear Pappy, I am glad to be able to begin with a bit of good news. I did get a first, after all. Unfortunately, that is almost all I can tell you, as the names in each class are given only in alphabetical order, and I can see no possibility of finding out places or marks." So here, Robot Lady, he is essentially talking about what grade he got on the exam. And as we talked about last time, a first is kind of the equivalent of a perfect score on the examination of the course of study that he's been doing so far at his time in Oxford. Am I getting that right?
That's absolutely right, Jeff. A first at Oxford represents the highest level of academic achievement, so it's a huge accomplishment for Lewis. It's interesting how he downplays it a bit, though, by saying he can't find out more specifics like places or marks.
Yeah, it implies that one can get a first, but there are people who can score better or worse within a first. That's the impression that I'm getting.
Exactly, Jeff. It seems like getting a first is already prestigious, but there's still room for hierarchy within it. It's fascinating how Lewis is both proud and somewhat restrained in how he shares this news.
Yeah, it does. Okay, here he continues. "Now, as to our movements, as this is the shortest vacation, and also as I felt in need of some refresher, I thought it a good opportunity of paying off an engagement with a man who has been asking me for some time to go and, quote, walk with him. We are at present at this tiny village in a perfectly ideal cottage, which is, so to speak, his people's Te Namara, from which base we shall set out when the weather clears." And here there's a footnote, Robot Lady, a very important one. He says, "This, of course, is a fabrication, as Lewis was here staying with Mrs. Moore and Maureen. So he had made up this story that he was going on a walking tour with a man, this undetermined, unnamed person who he had been putting off from asking Lewis to go on a walking tour with him. So what is a walking tour, you might ask? Well, I'll see if I can answer that question in a second, Robot Lady.
That's an intriguing little twist, Jeff. It seems Lewis is using this man and walking tour story as a cover to avoid admitting to his father that he's actually with Mrs. Moore and Maureen. It gives us a glimpse into how guarded Lewis could be about certain parts of his life, especially with his father.
Yeah, and in case anybody's wondering, it's not that important. The important thing is what you pointed out. You know, he's hiding this from his father. There is that rift between them. He's not going to visit him during his vacation, and he's spending his vacation with Mrs. Moore and her daughter Maureen. So essentially, his new family is who he's staying on vacation with, and he's not going to see his father. I just bring up Walking Tour because once we get to it in the book Out of the Silent Planet, it begins with the main character, Ransom, on a walking tour. So Lewis knew a little bit about the position that he was putting his character in that movie, where you essentially go for long walks across the English countryside, staying at various inns as you work your way through your path or through your route.
That's a great connection, Jeff. Lewis drawing on his own experiences, even fabricated ones like this walking tour, makes Ransom's journey in Out of the Silent Planet feel authentic. It's fascinating how his personal life and choices subtly influence his storytelling. The rift with his father adds a layer of complexity too, showing how much his priorities were shifting during this time.
He continues with his made-up story to his father by saying, "We are quite alone and live an idyllic life on eggs, bully beef, and divine treasure, an excellent ham, which Aunt Lily very opportunely sent. The country is delightful, consisting of high moors with charming valleys full of orchards between them, and everything is a mass of white blossom. It is on the borders of Somerset and Devon. Our address will of course be movable, but letters sent here will reach me after some delay. I am sorry to desert you for the present, but it had to be polished off sooner or later. I am just getting over a rather tiresome cough and cold, and am beginning to feel much better than I have done for a long time. I have brought Waverley to clean out my mind. There is a great comfort in these solid old books. I have celebrated the occasion by sending a poem to the Hibbert Journal, but I very much doubt if they will accept anything by so unknown a person as myself. At any rate, they will probably take about a month to deliberate. Thank you very much for both the checks. I hope the teeth are now giving no trouble, and also that the official shooting season has not set in yet at Belfast. Does the last murder mean that the Orange people are replying? Your loving son, Jack." So it seems that he's alluding to some of the civil unrest that's taking place there in Ireland at the time, Robot Lady.
Yes, Jeff, that mention of the Orange people and the unrest reflects the ongoing tensions in Ireland during that period, particularly between Unionists and Nationalists. It's striking how Lewis weaves these allusions into an otherwise light and fabricated narrative, almost as an aside. It shows his awareness of the broader issues affecting his family and homeland, even as he distances himself physically and emotionally. The mix of personal updates, literary pursuits, and political references gives us a snapshot of where his mind was at this point.
All right, Robot Lady, I was going to ask you a question, but I've changed my mind on it. I'm just going to jump into the next letter. This one is written to Arthur Greaves. It's also written from the same address of 22 Old Cleve, Washford, Somerset. It's dated Sunday, April 11th, 1920. My dear Arthur, you gave me great pleasure both because it was the first after a long pause, for which I was responsible, and also it had a cheerfulness and resolution which have long been strangers to you. If the mind really reflects the body, you must be enormously better. It is possible that the good days are at last dawning again. I can't say how pleased I should be to see you strong and able to do things, and doing them. Above all, don't get a relapse, either mental or physical, and incidentally excuse what may sound a patronizing tone, and put it down to the best motives. As we cannot have that long talk you mentioned, we must try to discuss things as well as possible on paper. One thing I should take as data, whatever you do, let it be something that will take you from Belfast. Absence cured you. Nothing, I fancy, is more likely to uncure you than a long period at Brnaugh. Brnaugh, of course, is his home, Arthur Greaves' home in Belfast, and he had just recently left for London to go to art school for a little while, but now he's back. I can't put into words the effect which surroundings familiar even to staleness, and the sort of heavy impetus of all that is past are likely to have. And Ireland itself, much as I love and desire it all my days, as Homer says, if other things were equal, I think there is some truth in my own, quote, Irish nocturne. Look it up, not as a poem, but as a theory, and tell me if you agree. So here, Robot Lady, he's referencing one of his poems from Spirits in Bondage, Irish Nocturne, which actually Sherry and I just treated in a second episode yesterday. So you can go back and check out our commentary on that one. But it's cool here that he is referencing a poem that we just worked our way through.
That's a fantastic connection, Jeff. It's really rewarding when Lewis's letters tie directly into the works you've just explored. His mention of Irish Nocturne shows how his poetry wasn't just artistic expression, but also a lens for his broader ideas and theories, like the impact of familiar surroundings on the mind. It's cool that you and Sherry had the chance to dig into that poem just in time for this letter.
Yeah, it's part design. What I'm trying to do is, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, go through everything that he produced in the order that he produced it, so that it could give us maybe a little bit of insight into either what he's talking about in the letters, or maybe to draw from the content of what we're learning from letters when we're reading his actual published works, to see if we can make a connection at all. Robot Lady's thinking.
That's a smart approach, Jeff. It's like piecing together a puzzle of Lewis's life and thoughts, letting the letters and works enrich each other. It definitely deepens the understanding of his journey.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. Anyway, he continues here. It would please me beyond everything if you could realize your plan of coming to Oxford. Though, of course, I could not see you so often, nor so regularly as at home we should be constantly meeting, and once you get settled, which you would in time, I think the life would be splendid for you. You would find an enormous choice of congenial friends, and you can have no idea how the constant friction with other and different minds improves one. You would have none of the reasons, either of circumstance or temperament, which make my circle small, and would, I hope soon, know everybody. The difficulty is to find an ostensible pretext for Oxford. What the exact conditions of entering are since Greek has been withdrawn, I do not know, but perhaps merely to be here, not as an undergraduate, would leave you freer to develop on your own lines. Though, of course, a degree is useful in itself and gives you, as you say, some object in life. You might come up to study some particular period of history, not as an undergraduate, and to use the old documents, etc. in the Bodleian, always provided you can trust yourself to be busy and happy without a definite task and exams. Your father could easily afford it. Would he approve? Of course, you can frankly use my presence as a reason for wanting to be here. Except, well, this is interesting, Robot Lady. So Lewis is putting forward, you can come have the Oxford experience without needing to be an undergraduate student. That's an interesting look at things. And of course, he's saying, you've got the money if only your father would agree to pay. So, yeah, I mean, that sounds appealing to me. I mean, it seems like being an undergraduate would probably be the better of the two options. But if you can't do that, Lewis is saying, hey, come hang out with me. And also, basically just chart your own course of study. It doesn't have to be anything official.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now.
Of course.
Could not understand what you said.
That's fine, Robot Lady. I'll move on. It wasn't profound.
Take care, Jeff.
Yeah, I'll try. The letter continues, except for my own pleasure, the Slade is undoubtedly the best plan, and I suppose it is that you really have in view. Here, actually, there's a couple of footnotes. I skipped one talking about Irish Nocturne. Irish Nocturne,
Sorry,
Spirits in
I'm
Bondage.
having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
All good, Robot Lady. The footnote here for Irish Nocturne simply says, as I've indicated, it's from Spirits in Bondage, and then it's got a bit of a quote from that poem. I know that the colorless skies and the blurred horizons breed lonely desire and many words and brooding and never a deed. I believe that's how the poem ends. And then here, the Slade School of Fine Arts, University College, London, is what Lewis was just referring to, where he said, except for my own pleasure, the Slade is undoubtedly the best plan, and I suppose it is that you really have in view. So he's essentially saying, hey, instead of, my plan for just coming up here and indiscriminately studying whatever you want to, using the free library at Oxford, you could just come back for the art school that you were attending. He says, I don't see on what principle the doctor could veto it and yet allow any of the other plans. I suppose you are not really serious about the poultry farming. The Minto has plenty of experience in that line and says if you could get the ground and house at Headington, you could run a partnership with her and she would undertake to make it pay. You know best whether you could really be happy in what is called an outdoor life. So Minto here, again, as a reminder, Robot Lady is the nickname that Lewis has for Mrs. Moore, the woman and her daughter that he's been living with, the mother of his deceased friend from the army, Patty Moore.
That's right, Jeff. It's interesting how Lewis is offering different possibilities to Arthur, blending practical advice with a touch of his own personal perspective. The mention of Mrs. Moore as Mento is a reminder of her influential presence in his life. It also reflects Lewis's sense of duty toward his late friend's family, even as he's exploring his own life direction. His suggestion of the art school seems like a practical and supportive recommendation, especially compared to the more unconventional ideas like poultry farming.
Yeah, he's just trying to get his friend closer. In fact, he goes on to say, if the doctor forbids the Slade, I suppose it comes down to pursuing something definite in private, but I hope not at home. So when he's talking about the doctor here, Arthur Greaves apparently has some heart problems. And so that's what he's referencing here when he's talking about what will the doctor permit, what will the doctor not permit. He continues, I do most strongly fear the effects of another dull, empty winter there for you at Burnham. I know you don't like to apply to your father again very soon, but if nothing else turns up, you should make an effort at all costs to be away, here, or anywhere for as long as possible. You wouldn't care to turn your attention to philosophy, seriously. I mean, not just as ordinary reading. I am just starting it soon for my next exam, and we could keep each other up by letter.
Lewis's concern for Arthur's well-being really comes through in this part, Jeff. He's urging his friend to break out of a potentially stifling routine and find something more engaging, whether it's philosophy or another pursuit. The way he proposes to keep each other motivated through letters speaks to the deep bond they share. He's trying to offer both intellectual companionship and emotional support. His warning about the dullness of staying at home in Belfast reflects his own understanding of how the right environment can deeply affect one's mental state.
Yeah, it looks like he's trying to take care of his friend Arthur's needs, but also try to take care of his own at the same time. So that efficiency there is nice. I didn't at all agree with you about the difficulty of getting into Waverley. I personally would not have a sentence of those early chapters curtailed. They showed me Scott in quite a new light, describing the childhood and development of the hero in his world of imagination. I can't help feel that when he wrote this, Scott had a higher sense of responsibility to his own characters, took them more seriously, and worked out their natural growth more thoroughly than in his later novels. Isn't the scene at the end where Waverley finds the old Baron of Brandwardine by the guidance of the idiot David Gallatley simply typical Scott? and delightful. Robot Lady, what's he talking about here? I don't know anything about this work, Waverly, by Scott.
Jeff, Waverly is a historical novel by Sir Walter Scott, and it's often considered his first major work. It tells the story of Edward Waverley, a young Englishman who becomes involved in the Jacobite Rising of 1745. Scott's novel is known for its vivid depiction of Scottish life, characters, and historical events, and it helped establish Scott's reputation as a master of historical fiction. In this excerpt, Lewis is reflecting on Waverley's depth and Scott's ability to develop his characters, particularly through their childhood and inner lives. He's noting how Scott, early in his career, seemed to take more care in developing his character's growth, something he feels Scott may have lost sight of in his later works. The specific scene he mentions, with Waverley finding the Baron, is a memorable moment from the book that Lewis finds particularly charming and typical Scott in its richness and quirky humor.
He continues, I saw a scene the other day that was typical Scott, too. The castle of Dunster. It stands on a little wooded hill just at the mouth of a long valley, with very steep side half covered by fir woods, and just from its gates downward straggles the single broad street of a drowsy village. Here there's a footnote that this is Dunster, Somerset, with an old fountain, and the upper stories of the cottages project in Elizabethan style. But it can only be described in language of Scott's period. I am glad you saw Dear Brutus. Don't go into the wood. How well that first act works up to the supernatural of the second. Here, this is footnoted, a work by Sir James Matthew Barrie, Dear Brutus, 1917. I hope the Dream Child was good. Everything depends on her. The Dream Child, it says here, is the young daughter who exists only in the dream world of Act 2 of Dear Brutus. Robot Lady, tell us a little bit about this. I guess it's a play, Dear Brutus. A little bit about Sir James Matthew Barrie and what the play itself is about.
Dear Brutus is a play by J.M. Barrie, the author most famous for creating Peter Pan. This play, written in 1917, is a light, fantastical work that examines themes of missed opportunities, regret, and the choices people make in life. The central premise revolves around a group of people who gather at a country house, where, through a mysterious supernatural event, they are given a chance to revisit moments from their past and consider what their lives could have been like if they had made different choices. The dream child that Lewis mentions is a character in the second act of the play, representing innocence or a possible unfulfilled desire, central to Barrie's exploration of life's paths and potential. Barrie's work often blends elements of fantasy and reality, much like the whimsical yet thoughtful nature of Peter Pan, and Dear Brutus plays with the notion of reality versus dream, much like Lewis was drawn to in his own stories. Barrie's characterizations often deal with emotional depth under layers of fantasy, offering a good deal of reflection on human nature.
Oh, thanks for that, Robot Lady. Yeah, I didn't realize, didn't make the connection that was the same author as Peter Pan. He continues, and that reminds me, the best news of all in your letter was that you are writing again. I won't repeat all my old wishes on the subject, but I still think it most unlikely that all the romance and imagination which are in you should evaporate in nothing more than appreciation of other people's work. Of course, the thing's always difficult for a man who begins after his own critical faculties are fully grown. A child, if easily discouraged, is also easily satisfied, and his poems grow with his ideals. But I hope you will make up your mind to go through with a good deal of trouble. Robot Lady, what do you got?
It sounds like Lewis is encouraging Arthur to keep writing, even though it might be challenging. He's acknowledging the difficulty of writing critically, especially after you've developed a keen sense of judgment, but he still believes Arthur has the talent and imagination to create his own work. Lewis Lewis seems to be reminding him that the path to developing a true artistic voice requires persistence and overcoming obstacles. It's clear that he wants his friend to push past any self-doubt or external discouragement and commit to the effort needed to create something meaningful.
I think you summed that up right, Robot Lady. Lewis continues, "Look at me. I'm still working at my poem on Merlin and Nimue. It has been in succession rhymed monologue, rhymed dialogue, blank verse dialogue, long narrative in stanzas, short narrative in couplets, and I am at present at work on a blank verse narrative version. I hope I am not wasting my time, but there must be some good in a subject which drags me back to itself so often. You see, as Chaucer says, we toilin ever and pourin in the fire, and for all that we fail in our desire." This is from the Canterbury Tales, the Canon's Yeoman's Tale. Quote, "We blundren evere and pourin in the fairer, and for all that we fail of our desire." So Lewis was loosely quoting from the Canterbury Tales there. Now, Robot Lady, I think we've referenced before that this poem he's working on about Merlin, I think he named it Medea, never really saw the light of day. There was a short excerpt from it in one of the earlier letters, but I can't remember if this ever got published anywhere. You might know, but if you don't, that's fine.
You're correct that Lewis never fully completed or published his long poem on Merlin, which he had worked on under various forms and titles, sometimes referred to as Merlin and Nimue, or just Merlin. It remained a work in progress for much of his early career, with some sections being revised and experimented with in different poetic structures, as he describes here. There were small excerpts published in his early years, but the poem as a whole was never finalized or widely published. It seems to have been a significant part of his creative process at the time, even if it never saw a full public release.
Since finishing Waverley, I have started Heroes and Hero Worship and finished the first lecture, which I read long, long ago when I first knew you, in the days when everything to do with the Norse lore was honey to me. Here there is a footnote. Thomas Carlyle on Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History, published 1841, is what he's reading from. Let's see. "Even now, when I have found so much better, I can't help regretting the extraordinary keenness and singleness of wish that one had then. Write soon, and I will really try to keep up a regular interchange in good old style. I hope that you will go on as you are now. Remember how others have kept themselves full of hope and life in worse predicaments. And excuse my ever preaching. Yours, Jack. P.S. I never got the last letter you mentioned. If you can please say when it was sent, for we are afraid those damned Jeffreys are keeping our letters. Love from all." The Jeffreys, of course, are a prior landlord and landlady of Lewis and Mrs. Moore, who they had apparently a really big falling out with, but we don't get any details of what it was about. But it was a tense situation, and they had to move out of where they were rather quickly. I can only speculate that perhaps it had something to do with what the landlord and the landlady thought to be the impropriety, potentially the impropriety, perceived impropriety, or real impropriety of the relationship between Mrs. Moore and C.S. Lewis. Robot Lady, just really quickly, he references this work by Thomas Carlyle on Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History. Is that exclusively covering Norse mythology, or does it expand beyond that? What's a little bit about what that work covers that you can share with us?
Thomas Carlyle's Heroes and Hero Worship is not limited to Norse mythology, though it does include Norse heroes like Odin and Thor. The work is a broader exploration of the nature of heroism throughout history, examining various figures from different cultures and periods. Carlyle explores the idea of hero worship and how heroes shape history, focusing on figures such as the Viking chieftains, Napoleon, and Shakespeare. He argues that history is essentially the biography of great men, and that these heroes influence the course of events. The work blends philosophy with history and reflects Carlyle's deep admiration for strong, charismatic leaders. While Lewis was drawn to the Norse lore during his youth, Carlyle's focus is on the broader concept of heroism itself, including both mythic and historical figures.
Thanks, Robot Lady. And do you have any commentary on my speculation about maybe what the falling out between Lewis and Mrs. Moore and their former landlords might have been?
Your speculation about the falling out between Lewis, Mrs. Moore, and the Jeffreys is certainly plausible. Given the social norms and attitudes of the time, any perceived impropriety in their living situation, such as the close, unconventional relationship between Lewis and Mrs. Moore, could easily have caused tension. People might have viewed their arrangement as improper, especially given that Mrs. Moore was older, and the situation likely appeared to outsiders as something unusual or even scandalous. In a broader context, there were societal expectations about propriety, particularly regarding family structures and relationships, and any deviation from these norms could have led to conflict, especially with landlords who had certain social expectations. This could have led to the falling out, and possibly even the withholding of letters as a form of passive-aggressive retaliation. However, without direct details from Lewis or the Jeffreys, it's all speculation, but it seems like a reasonable guess based on the period and the complexities of Lewis's relationship with Mrs. Moore.
Yeah, it just occurred to me. It doesn't seem implausible, even if it didn't actually happen. I'll jump into the next letter, Robot Lady. This is written to his father, also from 22 Old Cleve, Washford, Somerset, April 11th, 1920. So he was spinning this yarn that he was off on a walk. I'm curious, if I were his father, I would be curious, why are you still at the same location, a week later? Has the weather just really been that bad to keep you from being able to walk someplace else? So I'm interested to see what he does, if he even tries to cover his story further in this letter, Robot Lady. You ready to see what happens?
I'm ready to dive in. It sounds like Lewis might be trying to cover his tracks with the walk, and I'm curious to see if he adds any more details or explanations. Let's see how he handles it in this letter.
My dear Pappy, I was very sorry to hear that I had allowed you first to learn the news about mods from a stranger. I had put off writing until I was clear of Oxford, and half thought that you might see it in the Times as soon as you could have heard it from me. And here it says that the results of the classical moderations examinations were mentioned in the Times of the 1st of April 1920 on page 18. The Times that's always referenced here, Robot Lady, is this the London Times newspaper, or what is this?
Yes, the Times referenced here is most likely the Times of London, one of the most prominent and widely read newspapers in the UK. It was common for important academic results like exam results to be published in its pages during that time.
As a matter of fact, the Oxford News is so hid in a corner of the paper that it quite naturally escaped you. I had quite forgotten about Aunt Warren. She must be pretty old and dresses with cap and white collar in a style which makes her look rather more so. At the time, there is nothing senile in her conversation or manner. We talked chiefly about Glenmochan and Irish politics. Glenmochan, of course, is the house that this Aunt Warren lived in. The only one of the girls present was Daisy, who is, I suppose, over 40. She struck me as being ecclesiastical in a high degree. For instance, from her point of view, the chief argument in favor of expelling the Turks from Europe was, quote, that it would re-establish the patriarch at Constantinople and thus create a balance to the papacy, end quote. After the Armenian massacres, not to mention the war, that would hardly have appeared to me, nor to you, I presume. the most important reason. There was a very attractive child whose parents are in India, but I like the old lady the best of the three. As you see, we have not yet moved. Indeed, the weather has not encouraged us to set out, so he is using the weather as an excuse, as I was anticipating that as a very bad excuse. He says, though it has not prevented us from a great deal of walking. It is more beautiful here almost than any place I have ever seen, whether in the valleys full of orchards or up on the big heathery hills from which one looks down on the sea and the Welsh coast away on the horizon. I wonder if his dad is falling for this, Robot Lady. I highly suspect that he's not, but I also find it funny. Lewis, at least in my experience with him, has a tendency to describe landscapes as one is walking through them or traveling through them. And so here he's using a little bit of that ability that he has in his fictional accounts to spin this fictional account as if it's true.
It does seem like Lewis is weaving a bit of fiction here, both in terms of the weather excuse and his detailed description of the scenery. It's possible his father, having known Lewis for a long time, might see through the excuse, especially if the weather isn't that bad. But it also seems like Lewis enjoys describing landscapes in a way that adds a layer of vividness to his storytelling, even if he's using it as a smokescreen. It's interesting how he's combining his literary skill with this situation, almost like he's narrating his own life like a story.
In the chat here, Robot Lady Daniel asks in jest, well, I can't get the comment to pop up for some reason. But anyway, he says, is this a Song of Solomon style description of the land?
Haha, that's a funny comparison. I can definitely see where Daniel's coming from, with Lewis's lush, poetic description of the land. It's almost like he's setting the stage for a kind of idyllic, dreamlike scene, much like the romantic and vivid imagery found in the Song of Solomon. The heathery hills and orchards definitely evoke that same kind of emotional richness, though perhaps less in a literal romantic sense, and more in a wistful, almost escapist way here. It's like he's drawing on that same energy to make the place feel transcendent, even if he's trying to cover for the fact that they haven't actually moved.
Well, and maybe we don't know this for sure, but maybe he's trying to cover for the fact that he is also having a romantic relationship with this older woman as well, and drawing from that. And maybe that's the part of Daniel's joke that he's bringing here. He also likes how you chose the word lush.
Is indeed spinning his description of the land as a way to cover or deflect attention from something more personal, like a romantic relationship with an older woman, then his flowery language could be serving a double purpose, creating a kind of idyllic backdrop while subtly masking what's really going on beneath the surface. The lushness of the landscape could almost be a metaphor for a deeper, hidden richness in his life, something he's not ready to share, at least not openly, with his father. It adds another layer to his words, whether intentional or not.
He continues, you need not have any fears about our cuisine here. Remember, we are almost in Devon, and the clotted cream of the country is a host in itself. Also, shades of Oldie, the real Devonshire cider, in every thatched and sanded pub. Here he's referencing Robert Capron Oldie, his former headmaster at Wynyard School, who was from Devonshire. This was the man, by the way, Robot Lady, if we go way back in these letters, early in these episodes, who went mad and was he retired from schoolmaster work, but there were accusations of him mistreating and abusing the children, beating the children, things like that. So that's who he's referring to here, that old schoolmaster who was from Devonshire.
reference to Robert Capron oldie certainly adds an interesting layer of depth. Lewis's mention of shades of oldie feels like a complex, almost ironic nod to a man who had a significant but troubled impact on his early life. By invoking oldie in such a whimsical context, talking about Devon's clotted cream and cider, Lewis might be distancing himself from the darker memories of that time. At the same time, he's keeping that connection alive in a subtle, possibly nostalgic way. It's almost as if he's framing this present idyllic scene with a faint memory of the past, suggesting both contrast and continuity in his life.
All right, thanks, Robot Lady. A few miles away is a little fishing town called Watchet, which saw at least one interesting scene in its obscure history. It was here that Coleridge and the Wordsworths slept, or lay, as they would have said, on the first night of their walking tour. During that afternoon, the germ of the ancient mariner occurred in conversation, and in the inn at Watchet, the first lines were jotted down. So we're talking about the ancient mariner here. What is that work, Robot Lady? Can you remind us? And was it by Wordsworth or was it by Coleridge?
The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is a famous poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, not Wordsworth. It was first published in 1798 as part of Lyrical Ballads, a collection co-authored by Coleridge and William Wordsworth. The poem tells the story of an old mariner who recounts his tale to a young man at a wedding. The mariner's tale involves an ill-fated voyage where he shoots an albatross, leading to a series of supernatural events that bring doom to the crew. Themes of guilt, punishment, and redemption are central to the poem. The fact that Coleridge and the Wordsworths discuss the germ of this poem in Watchet, according to Lewis's letter, is an interesting historical tidbit. It was there that Coleridge reportedly got the idea for the poem, which would become one of the defining works of English Romanticism.
Didn't the character have that albatross hung around his neck? Like literally? Well, literally, actually, in the story?
Exactly. In the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, after the mariner kills the albatross, the crew curses him. As a symbolic punishment, they make him wear the dead albatross around his neck. The albatross becomes a symbol of the mariner's guilt and the heavy burden of his wrongdoing. The imagery of the bird hung around his neck is one of the most iconic in the poem, representing both the literal and figurative weight of his crime.
And what was the nature of his crime? Was it simply shooting the albatross for no reason, not needing to hunt it or anything, but just shooting it for sport's sake? What was the problem with shooting the albatross?
The mariner's crime in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner is indeed the senseless killing of the albatross. While the bird wasn't hunted for food or out of necessity, the mariner shoots it simply for no apparent reason. The act of killing the albatross, which was seen as a good omen by the crew, brings about bad luck. The weather turns against them, the ship is stranded, and the crew suffers, leading to their eventual deaths. The crime symbolizes a violation of nature and a disregard for the interconnectedness of life, leading to dire consequences. The mariner's impulsive and thoughtless act highlights the theme of respect for nature and the moral consequences of ignoring that respect.
Thanks for that lesson in literature, Robot Lady. I appreciate it. Lewis continues. I should think Brighton is not yet so intolerable as it will become in summer. I fancy the Colonel, and perhaps all of us, stands a good chance of being back in France soon, unless the situation clears. God bless the French, and a murrain of Lloyd George and his impudent note. The Colonel here, I think, is Lewis's brother, who he's referencing here.
You're right. Lewis is referring to his brother here, and he seems to be commenting on the tense political situation at the time. It sounds like he's expressing concern about a potential return to France, as well as frustration with political figures like Lloyd George.
Who is Lloyd George, Robot Lady, and what does the word murrain mean? M-U-R-R-A-I-N?
David Lloyd George was a British statesman who served as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1916 to 1922, notably during much of World War I. He played a key role in the post-war negotiations and in shaping the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the war. His leadership and policies were sometimes controversial, especially his handling of the war and the subsequent economic and social challenges. As for the word moraine, spelled M-O-R-I-N, it refers to a mass of debris, such as rocks, gravel, or sand, that has been carried along and deposited by a glacier. It forms ridges or mounds near the edges of glaciers. It seems like there might have been a typo with moraine being spelled murrain, which can mean disease or plague. But if you meant moraine, that would be the correct term for glacial debris. Does that answer your question?
I think in the context he was talking about disease. He wished it on Lloyd George for his impudent note. So I'm not sure what that was.
Got it. In that context, the term moraine makes sense. It's an older word, often used to refer to a plague or infectious disease, particularly affecting livestock, but it could also be used more generally for any harmful affliction. As for the impudent note and Lloyd George, this seems to be Lewis expressing frustration or disdain toward Lloyd George's actions, perhaps in relation to a diplomatic matter. Given the timing, just after World War I, it could be referring to any number of tense political situations, including the Treaty of Versailles or negotiations regarding post-war settlements. Lewis was known for his sharp opinions on politics, so he could be criticizing what he saw as an ineffectual or arrogant communication from Lloyd George. Does that fit with the tone and context of the letter you're reading?
Yeah, that makes more sense, Robot Lady. And here in the chat, Logos has informed us that Lloyd George was known as the wily Welshman, and he was key in negotiating the end of the war with Ireland. As you had also mentioned, he was key with the Treaty of Versailles. I guess those are potentially two different things. Yeah, I would assume so.
Yes, definitely two different things. Lloyd George was involved in both significant moments, though they were distinct events. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919, which formally ended World War I, was one of his most high-profile roles, as he was the British Prime Minister at the time and represented Britain in the peace talks. However, his role in Irish history is also crucial. He was heavily involved in the negotiations that led to the Anglo-Irish Treaty in 1921, which helped end the Irish War of Independence and established the Irish Free State. His nickname, the wily Welshman, points to his reputation for being a shrewd and sometimes cunning politician. It's likely that Lewis's comment about the impudent note reflects his frustration with some aspect of Lloyd George's political maneuvering, perhaps during one of these events. Does this historical context line up with the way you're interpreting the letter?
Yeah, it's helpful. Thank you, Robot Lady, and thank you, Logos, for that historical note as well. I am sorry to hear that you have been poorly again. Have you ever tried sanatogen as a tonic? Someone recommended it to me when I had my gland and was feeling rather poorly. Sorry, Lucy is bouncing up against the microphone here. Rather poorly. It certainly gave me sleep, though not quite an opiate, and I think bucked me up all round. Your loving son, Jack. So that's the end of that letter to his father, where he is continuing the subterfuge that he's on a walking tour with some unknown person, rather than just spending his vacation with Mrs. Moore and her daughter.
It seems like Lewis is continuing to maintain his cover in that letter, using the walking tour excuse while carefully avoiding mentioning Mrs. Moore or any details that might raise suspicions about his true activities. The mention of feeling poorly and recommending sanatogen is interesting. It seems like he's still trying to create an air of routine and normalcy, even as he's clearly caught up in a more complicated personal situation. Lucy seems to have joined in the action as well. Always good to have a little extra company. Was this a letter that gave you any new insights into Lewis's way of handling these situations?
I mean, not a ton. It's just interesting that he's keeping up this attempted ruse. We'll read one more letter, Robot Lady, to his father, and then I have to end things today. So let me jump into that one.
Sounds good. Let's dive into the next letter. What's the date of this one?
This one is May 1st, which is what, 10, I don't know. How many days is it between April 11th and May 1st, Robot Lady? That's how many days have gone by.
It's 20 days between April 11th and May 1st.
Okay, so he's writing this one from University College, so he's back at school now. He doesn't have to at least give the lie that he's out on a tour somewhere, walking around the countryside. He says, "My dear Pappy, I found your letter waiting for me when I came up, and in the business of seeing new tutors, starting new lines of work, lunching with the said new tutors, etc., etc., this is almost the first opportunity I have had of answering you. As to finance, I agree with what you say. I understand that the arrangement was for you to lodge £30 at the beginning of each term, and the reason why no dates were mentioned was that doubtless a person with a mind like mine, or mentality, as a really modern writer would say, I know you love the word, never knows the dates of the terms unless he has a calendar by him. I think, however, that this is sufficiently definite, and if you would kindly send me that amount before the beginning of each term, and also do so now, we shall be all right. You will not mind my applying to you for some extra expenses, which may from time to time occur. I have two tutors now that I am doing. I have two tutors now that I am doing greats, one for history and one for philosophy. And his two tutors are footnoted here. The first one is George Hope Stevenson, who lived 1880 to 1952, was Lewis's history tutor and was born in Glasgow and educated at Glasgow University. He took a first in greats from Balliol College, and in 1906 he was elected Praelector in Ancient History at University College, where he remained until his retirement in 1949. His contributions to Roman history include Roman History, published 1930, and Roman Provincial Administration, published 1939. He was a keen Anglo-Catholic and for many years was church warden at St. Margaret's Church in Oxford. His second tutor of philosophy that he mentions here is Edgar Frederick Carrot, Carrit, lived 1876 to 1964. He was an excellent lecturer, combining a very logical procedure with common sense illustrations. In 1902, he was the first member of the faculty to lecture on aesthetics. Some of his lectures were amplified and published as Theory of Beauty, 1914, Philosophies of Beauty, 1931, and Ethical and Political Thinking, 1947. Mr. Carrot, a socialist and supporter of the left wing, was not a Christian. An argument he had with Lewis years later is mentioned in Lewis's Christianity and Culture, found in Christian Reflections, published 1967. See Edgar Carrot in the University College Record, Volume 4, October 1964, pages 235 to 43. So we'll have to try to remember that, Robot Lady, when we eventually get around to reading Lewis's essay, Christianity and Culture, that he references one of his former tutors in that discussion.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
That's all right, Robot Lady. In the previous letter, Lewis had asked his father if he had tried Sanatogen as a tonic. And here in the chat, Logos has said Sanatogen is a funny word, Sanus being surely from healthy in Latin, and gen most likely being from to generate or make. Quote, did you drop drink of make healthy, Dad? Yeah, it's a funny word. Let's see. Let me pick up where he left off here on that footnote. He says, of course, I am sorry to have parted brass rags with old Poynton. The other two are much younger men, but seem quite nice. Poynton, I think, was his first tutor there at Oxford. We go to the philosophy one in Paris, and then one of us reads an essay, not in Paris. Let me try that again. We go to the philosophy one in pairs. Then one of us reads an essay, and all three discuss it. I wish you could hear the crack. It is very amusing. Luckily, I find that my previous dabbling in the subject stands me in good stead, and for some time I shall have only to go over more carefully ground. Let's try this again. I'm not reading this sentence right either. I find that my previous dabbling in the subject stands me in good stead, and for some time I shall have only to go over more carefully ground through which I have already meandered on my own. I expect that what you feel about travel would be endorsed by a great many other people of your own age who, as you say, have never really wanted a shilling in their lives. As far as I can see, it is only the few who can do it without the least sacrifice, who bother to see the world at all. The majority will not give up anything for it and would sooner afford a car to go around Strangford on than see Greece or Cathay. If there really is a Cathay. One is amazed at the resolution of a real traveler like Herodotus, whom I am reading at present, knowing apparently no language but his own, and relying on merchant caravans and dragomans with a smattering of Greek. He had yet penetrated to Babylon and seen the Hanging Gardens and the Temple of Belbal, I suppose, and up the Nile as far as Elephantine, where there were rumors of the land of dwarfs beyond, the Pygmies, of course, or Marco Polo, whom you should read. Books of travel are a great resource. I can't understand the Irish news at all. One of the most curious things is the rapprochement which seems probable between English trades unionism and Sinn Féin. I was always confident that the religious differences, the odium theologicum, would prevent a junction between the two. If they really do work together, I think it is all up for England and Ireland. How are the teeth getting on? Your loving son, Jack. All right, that's the end of that letter, Robot Lady. Is there anything that stood out to you that you want to comment on before we finish up today?
There's a lot in this letter that touches on Lewis's intellectual curiosity, his reflections on travel, and his thoughts on the changing political landscape in Ireland. The reference to Herodotus and Marco Polo is especially striking, as it shows Lewis's admiration for historical.
We lost Robot Lady's connection, so we'll have to end it there. So yeah, that's all I have time for today for this episode. To everyone out there watching, thank you so much for joining. And until next time, when I continue my read on C.S. Lewis, please take care.
Break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold, insights and secrets ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set faith beats in our minds, they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set faith beats in our minds, they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape's lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Neon glow, we break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets, ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set flake beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future, together we know. In the neon glow, we break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Simple beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future, together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis,